The war ended not with a final battle, but with a slow collapse. Commander Vector transmitted Ambassador Park's terms to High Arbiter Kesseth, and the ancient leader refused them with all the fury his species was known for. But fury could not rebuild. The 600 ships lost in the human system fury could not restore the confidence of crews who had watched their comrades die against an enemy they could not understand. Fury could not convince the other sovereignty races to continue supporting a war that had already been lost one by one. The Velith allies abandoned them. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Dominion for millennia were suddenly closed. Resources that had flowed freely to Velith worlds were redirected elsewhere. The empire that had dominated galactic politics for longer than humanity had existed began to crumble from within. 3 months after the Armada retreated from human space, Kesseth appeared on a galactic broadcast. His scales had lost their luster. His eyes no longer burned with cold fire. He looked like what he was, a defeated leader facing the end of everything he had built. To the humans of Earth, he said, and every word seemed to cause him physical pain, "The Velith Dominion acknowledges its actions against your species. We accept responsibility for the deaths of your researchers in the Kuiper Belt. We will pay reparations as specified in the terms negotiated with your ambassador." He paused, and for a moment it seemed he might not continue. Then he spoke the words that changed galactic history. "We were wrong to dismiss you. We were wrong to deny you membership in the sovereignty. We were wrong to believe that your short lives made you lesser beings. You have proven yourselves worthy of respect, and we offer that respect now." The broadcast ended across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched in stunned silence. The Velith had apologized. The mightiest empire in known space had admitted defeat to a species they had called vermin on Earth. The celebrations lasted for days. Humans who had grown up believing they were alone in the universe now understood that they were part of something much larger. They had faced the greatest military power in the galaxy and survived. More than survived. They had won, but Ambassador Una Park did not celebrate. She stood in her office on the moon and watched the stars. Thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was still to come, a message arrived from the conclave of ascending species. The elder races were requesting a meeting, not to consider a human petition this time. They wanted to offer membership. Park traveled to the same station where she had been humiliated a year earlier. She walked the same black stone corridors. She entered the same high chamber where Kesseth had laughed at her species. But everything was different now. The 12 thrones were occupied by the same elder races. But their attitudes had transformed. Where there had been contempt, there was now wariness. Where there had been dismissal, there was now respect. And where Kesseth had sat in arrogant supremacy, there was now an empty throne. The Velith Dominion had Kalipsed Kasoth had been removed from power by his own people, who blamed him for the catastrophe he had brought upon them. The species that had ruled the galaxy was now struggling to maintain control of its own homeworld. Ambassador Park, the eldest of the remaining elders, spoke, a being of crystal and light whose name translated roughly as Eternal Witness. "The galactic sovereignty offers humanity full membership. We recognize that our previous decision was made in error. We ask that you join us as equals." Park stood in the speaking circle and looked at each of the elders in turn. "I accept your offer," she said, "but I have conditions." The elders shifted uncomfortably. Conditions. First, the sovereignty will reform its membership process. No species will ever again be denied consideration based on lifespan, homeworld conditions, or technological timeline. Young races deserve the same opportunity that older races received. Second, the strong will protect the weak. No more will powerful species exploit those who cannot defend themselves. The foundation compact that humanity has formed with the races who aided us will be recognized as a legitimate alternative to sovereignty membership. And third, Park continued, her voice steady, humanity will dismantle the Ember Array. A murmur ran through the chamber. You would give up your greatest weapon? Eternal Witness asked. We built it for defense, not conquest. We will not become the thing we fought against. The galaxy does not need another empire. It needs partners who respect each other and work together for common good. The conditions were accepted within a year. The Ember devices were publicly dismantled, their components scattered across the void where they could never be reassembled. The Foundation Compact grew to include 15 species, all of them committed to the principles of mutual respect and collective defense and the galactic sovereignty. Humbled by its near destruction, began the slow process of reform on the anniversary of the Conclave's original rejection. Ambassador Park hosted a gathering on Earth. Representatives from dozens of species walked the streets of cities that had never before seen alien visitors. They marveled at the diversity of human culture, at the art and music and food that varied so wildly from one region to another. They began to understand what made humanity unique. A young Velith diplomat approached Park during the reception. His scales were lighter than Kesset's had been, almost silver in the evening light. Ambassador, he said, may I ask you a question? Of course. How did your species accomplish so much in such a short time? The elder races have been traveling the stars for millions of years. We have had only centuries. How did you surpass us? Park smiled and gestured toward the window outside. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. You measured us by how long we live, she said. You counted our years and found them wanting. But you should have measured us by how much we live. Every human knows that our time is limited. We do not have millennia to accomplish our goals. We do not have centuries to make our mark on the universe. We have only the brief span between birth and death. And we must make every moment count. She turned to face him directly. That is why we burn so bright. That is why we accomplished in decades what your species took millennia to achieve. We cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford to hesitate. We see what we want, and we reach for it with everything we have. The Velith diplomat nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Perhaps, he said, we dismissed you because we were afraid of what you might become if given the chance. Perhaps? Park agreed. But you do not need to be afraid anymore. We did not fight for dominance. We fought for the right to exist as equals. Now that we have that right, we intend to be the partners we always wanted to be. She extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting after a moment of hesitation. The Velith took it above them. The stars emerged one by one as darkness fell. Galaxy that had once looked upon humanity with contempt now looked with something closer to hope. The children of a death world had proven themselves worthy of the cosmos, and they were just getting started. The Velith Armada crossed into human-controlled space with all the confidence of a predator entering the territory of prey. 3,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged and their crews eager for the slaughter that awaited them. Commander Vector stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the distant yellow star grow brighter. How long until we reach weapons? Range of their world, he asked. 14 standard cycles. Commander, his navigation officer replied, they have nothing that can stop us. Our scouts report only a few hundred ships, and none of them appear to be armed. Vector made a sound of satisfaction. The primitives believed their star trick would frighten us into submission. They will learn that the Velith do not frighten. All ships maintain formation. We will crush them so completely that no species will ever again challenge our dominance. Aboard the Earth defense vessel Defiance, Commodore Yunji Beak studied the tactical display. With calm eyes, she had commanded naval vessels for 30 years. Before the United Defense Force recruited her for this assignment, she had fought pirates in the South China Sea, repelled attacks in the Persian Gulf, and led peacekeeping operations on 3 continents. None of that had prepared her for commanding humanity's first space fleet against an alien armada, but the principles remain the same. The enemy outnumbers us 15-1. She announced to her bridge crew, their ships are larger, faster, and more heavily armed than anything we possess. In a direct engagement, we would be destroyed within minutes. She paused to let that sink in. Fortunately, we are not going to give them a direct engagement. The display shifted to show a web of markers scattered throughout the solar system. For the past year, we have been preparing this battlefield. Every asteroid, every moon, every piece of debris in the outer system has been mapped, cataloged, and in many cases modified. The Velith expect to fight a fleet. Instead, they are going to fight a solar system. The first attack came 12 hours later. The Velith were passing through the Kuiper Belt when sensors detected multiple contacts approaching from every direction. Commander Vector assumed they were enemy ships and ordered his fleet to open fire. They were not ships, they were asteroids, hundreds of them, each one equipped with a small engine that had accelerated it to incredible speed. The Velith weapons vaporized dozens before they could strike, but dozens more got through. 3 warships died in the first wave, torn apart by rocks moving faster than any natural object had any right to move. Impossible. Vector hissed. They are throwing rocks at us. Effective rocks. Commander, his tactical officer noted grimly. Our shields were not designed for kinetic impacts of this magnitude. Then destroy the rocks before they reach us. Divert power to point defense systems. I want every weapon firing constantly. The order was obeyed. But it came with a cost, with their weapons focused on incoming debris. The Velith ships were less able to detect the small human vessels that darted in from unexpected angles. These ships did not engage in traditional combat. They fired a few shots, released clouds of chaff and electronic warfare drones, and vanished back into the darkness before the Velith could target them. The drones infiltrated Velith computer systems, corrupting navigation data and sending false sensor reading. Ships began firing on empty space. Convinced they were targeting enemies that did not exist, other ships found their engines responding to commands. No one had given what is happening. Vector demanded as another of his vessels veered wildly off course and collided with its neighbor. They are in our systems. Commander, our security protocols are useless against their infiltration methods. Impossible. Our systems are protected by encryption that would take centuries to break. They are not breaking it. The tactical officer said with something like fear in his voice. They are going around it. They are exploiting weaknesses in our hardware that we did not even know existed. Humanity had spent millennia learning to hack, to deceive, to find weaknesses in seemingly impregnable systems. Every war in human history had been fought not just with weapons, but with information, with misdirection, with the manipulation of perception. The Velith had never needed such tactics. They had always been powerful enough to simply overwhelm their enemies. They did not understand an opponent that refused to stand and fight. By the time the Armada reached Jupiter's orbit, they had lost 400 ships. Some had been destroyed by asteroid impacts. Others had fallen victim to their own corrupted systems. Few had been picked off by human strike teams that appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before retaliation was possible. Morale was collapsing. Velith crews have been raised on stories of glorious conquest. They have been told that their species was destined to rule the galaxy. No one had warned them about an enemy that fought like smoke and shadow on the flagship. Commander Vector received a communication from one of his subordinates. Commander, this is Captain Desak of the Dominion's Wrath. I am withdrawing my vessel from the fleet. You will do no such thing. Vector snarled. Desertion is punishable by death. Then execute me when we return home. If any of us return home, I will not leave my crew to slaughter against enemies we cannot even see. The humans have earned a name among my soldiers. They call them the Burning Ones, and I will not burn. For your pride, the Dominion's wrath turned and accelerated away from the fleet's 17 other ships. Followed Vector watched them go, and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear aboard the Defiance. Commodore Beak received reports of the defections with grim satisfaction. It is working, our first officer said. They are breaking. They are not broken yet, Beak replied. We have hurt them, but 2,000 ships can still destroy Earth if they reach weapons range. We need to keep the pressure on. She opened a channel to all human vessels, all units. This is Commodore Beak. Phase 3 begins now. Show them what humanity can do when we fight for our home. The next wave of attacks was unlike anything the Velith had ever witnessed. Human ships emerged from the atmosphere of Jupiter itself, where no sensor could detect them, and launched torpedoes that disrupted the magnetic containment of Velith power core ships, exploded from the inside out. Their crews never knowing what had killed them. Other human vessels used the rings of Saturn as cover, appearing just long enough to fire before disappearing back into the frozen debris the Velith tried to pursue. But their massive warships were too slow, too cumbersome for the tight maneuvers required one by one. They were picked apart in the command center on Earth. Defense Minister Seojun Kang watched the battle unfold with tears in his eyes. Every human who died was a tragedy, but every Velith ship that fell was a statement humanity would not be dismissed. Humanity would not be enslaved. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction on the Velith flagship. Commander Vector received a private transmission. The encryption was human, but the signature was unmistakable. Ambassador Una Park appeared on his screen, her face calm and her eyes steady. Commander Vector, she said, I am authorized to offer you terms. I do not negotiate with vermin. He spat. Then your fleet will die here, and your species will face the consequences alone. We have demonstrated that we can destroy your homeworld. We have demonstrated that your fleet cannot defeat us. The only question now is how many more of your people must die before you accept reality. Vector stared at her for a long moment behind him. Another explosion marked the death of another ship. What are your terms? He finally asked. Unconditional surrender, full reparations for the humans killed in the Kuiper Belt, and a formal apology from High Arbiter Keseth, broadcast to every world in the sovereignty. He will never agree to that. Then I suggest you convince him, because the alternative is extinction, and humanity has learned that mercy has limits. The transmission ended. Vector stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had believed about the galaxy. The Burning Ones had taught the Velith a lesson they would never forget. The Velith outer defense platforms had stood guard over their homeworld. For 3,000 years, they were monuments to the Dominion's power. Massive structures bristling with weapons that could vaporize entire fleets. They had never been tested in actual combat because no species had ever been foolish enough to challenge the Velith directly. They vanished in less than 4 seconds. The coronal mass ejection was precisely calibrated. It swept outward from the star in a focused wave of superheated plasma and radiation, striking only the orbital platforms while leaving everything else untouched. The planet below experienced nothing more than a slightly brighter sunrise on the surface. Billions of Velith looked up at a sky that suddenly seemed very empty. The message was clear. Humanity could have destroyed them. Humanity chose not to. High Arbiter Keseth received the news in his private chambers. His advisors watched him carefully, expecting rage or denial, or perhaps a call for immediate retaliation. Instead, the ancient reptilian simply stood very still for a long time. How is this possible? He finally asked. We do not know. High Arbiter, his chief scientist, admitted, "Our sensors detected no ships, no weapons platforms, nothing. The energy came from the star itself. That is impossible. And yet it happened." Kaseth turned to his military. "Commander, mobilize the war fleet. Every ship we have. We will burn that miserable rock and everyone on it." High Arbiter, the commander said carefully, "If they can control stars, our fleet may be walking into annihilation. Then we will die with honor." Kaseth snarled, "But we will not cower before creatures who live and die in the blink of an eye. Send the fleet across the galaxy." The sovereignty descended into chaos. Emergency sessions were called in every council chamber. Diplomats screamed at each other in languages that had not been raised in anger for centuries. The impossible had happened, and no one knew what to do about it on Earth. Ambassador Unipark appeared on every frequency simultaneously. She stood alone against a backdrop of stars, her face calm and her voice steady. "Citizens of the galactic sovereignty," she began, 3 days ago, the Velith Dominion murdered human researchers who were conducting peaceful scientific work in our own solar system. They broadcast those murders for your entertainment. They laughed while our people died. Yesterday, we demonstrated that humanity possesses capabilities the sovereignty believed impossible. We could have destroyed the Velith homeworld. We could have killed billions in retaliation for the deaths of a few dozen. We chose mercy instead." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. "But our mercy has limits to the races of the sovereignty. We say this. We have placed devices near 23 stars belonging to species that voted against human membership in the conclave. We do not wish to use them. We are not aggressors. We are not conquerors. But we will defend ourselves against any who threaten us." Coordinates of the Ember devices appeared on screen beside her. "You may verify these positions for yourselves. You will find our devices exactly where we say they are, and you will understand that humanity is no longer a species to be dismissed." The broadcast ended within hours. The carefully maintained unity of the galactic sovereignty began to crack. 3 smaller races formally withdrew from the alliance. Citing the Velith's unprovoked aggression, 7 more opened secret communication channels with Earth. Even some of the elder races began to question whether Kaseth had made a terrible mistake in the Kuiper Belt. The surviving hostages huddled in their cells and waited for death. There were 44 of them now, down from 47. They had no way of knowing what was happening beyond their prison walls. They only knew that their captors had become nervous, jumpy, and quick to anger. Captain Dohwan Shin watched the facility through the scope of his rifle from 3 kilometers away. His team of 12 had arrived in a ship so small and so carefully shielded that the Velith sensors had not detected it. They had been waiting for 2 days, studying patrol patterns and mapping guard positions. "Strike team, this is Shin," he whispered into his communicator. "All units confirm ready." 11 voices answered in turn. "We go in 5 minutes. Remember, the hostages are priority 1. Kill only when necessary. We want survivors who can tell their masters what happened here." The assault was brutal, and efficient human soldiers moved through the facility like ghosts, their weapons silenced and their movements coordinated with precision that came from generations of warfare against their own kind. The Velith had never faced an enemy that fought like this. They were accustomed to battles in space, fleet against fleet, where honor and tradition dictated the rules of engagement. They did not understand an enemy that hid in shadows and struck without warning. By the time the alarm sounded, half the guards were already dead. Captain Shin found the hostages in a chamber deep beneath the surface. They stared at him with hollow eyes, unable to believe that rescue had actually come. "I am Captain Shin of the United Defense Force," he said. We are taking you home." A woman in the front of the group began to cry. They said no one would come for us. They said humanity had abandoned us. Humanity does not abandon its own. Shin replied, "Not ever. Now move. We have a ship waiting." Escape was narrow. Velith reinforcements arrived, just as the last of the hostages boarded the shuttle. 3 of Shin's team died holding the corridor long enough for the ship to launch, but 44 humans who had expected to die in alien captivity were now racing toward Earth at speeds the Velith could not match. High Arbiter Kesseth received the news of the rescue with cold fury. "They dare to strike our territory," he hissed. "They dare to kill our soldiers and steal our prisoners. The fleet is ready." "High Arbiter," his commander reported, 3,000 ships await your order. Then give the order. We will show these insects what happens to those who challenge the Velith Dominion. We will reduce their planet to ash and scatter their remains across the void. They will be forgotten within a generation, and no species will ever again question Velith supremacy." The Armada launched within hours. It was the largest military mobilization in 3 centuries. A show of force meant to remind the galaxy that the Velith were not to be challenged. 3,000 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to devastate a continent, formed up and began their journey toward the distant yellow star that humanity called home. Ambassador Park watched the fleet's departure from her office on the moon. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it since the day she walked out of the high chamber. "They are coming," her aide said quietly. "Yes," Park agreed, "they are. And when they arrive, they will learn what humanity truly is." She turned to face the stars. "We offered them friendship. They chose war. Now they will discover why every species that has ever tried to conquer Earth has failed. We are the children of a death world. We were born in fire and blood and struggle, and we do not know how to surrender." The broadcast reached every screen on Earth at exactly midnight Greenwich time. It showed a Velith overseer standing over a row of kneeling humans, his clawed hand raised and a weapon that glowed with sick green light pointed at their heads. These creatures trespassed in Velith territory, the overseer announced in heavily accented English. They will learn the price of defying their betters. The weapon discharged. A young woman named Jisoo Kang, a geologist who had joined the Kuiper research team just 6 months ago, collapsed forward and did not move again. Her colleagues screamed and begged, but the Velith guards only laughed. The broadcast cut to static, but the message was clear. Humanity was being taught a lesson in the United Defense Council chambers beneath the Swiss Alps. The most powerful leaders on Earth sat in horrified silence. Defense Minister Seojung Kang gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. The woman who had died on screen was his niece. They killed her to make a point, President Chun of the Eastern Coalition said, a voice barely above a whisper. They are broadcasting this across the galaxy to show what happens to species that step out of line. How many of our people do they have? Asked Chancellor Weber of the European Union. 47. Replied Admiral Torres of the Western Alliance Navy. The entire research team from Outpost Janus. They were studying ice composition in the Kuiper Belt. They pose no threat to anyone. To the Velith, our existence is a threat, Seojun said. They see us as vermin that need to be exterminated before we become a problem. Then what do you suggest we do? Demanded Prime Minister Okonkwo of the African Federation. We have no military vessels. The sovereignty made sure of that. We cannot fight a war against an empire that spans 100 star systems. We can barely defend our own solar system. Seojun stood and walked to the center of the room where a holographic display flickered to life. What I am about to show you is classified at the highest level, he said. Only a handful of people know it exists. 3 years ago, after the conclave rejected our petition, A small group of scientists began working on something we call Project Ember. The display showed a schematic that none of them recognized. It looked like a satellite, but with strange protrusions and energy collectors that seemed designed to interface with something massive. "What are we looking at?" President Chun asked. "A weapon," Seijun replied. "The most powerful weapon humanity has ever created. The sovereignty told us we could not build military vessels. They said nothing about stellar engineering." Woman stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the room. Her name was Dr. Myri Cho, and she had spent the last 20 years studying the physics of stars. The Velith and the other elder races believe that stellar manipulation is impossible. She explained. Their own scientists attempted it millennia ago and failed. They assumed that if they could not do it, no one could. And they were wrong, Chancellor Weber guessed. They were very wrong. Myre confirmed. Humanity's understanding of solar physics comes from a unique perspective. We evolved on a world where we were constantly affected by our star's behavior. We studied solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and magnetic field fluctuations because our technology depended on predicting them. The elder races never had that pressure. Their homeworlds were stable, their stars predictable. They never needed to understand stellar mechanics the way we did. She gestured, and the display changed to show a star with lines of energy flowing from it in controlled patterns. Project Ember allows us to manipulate the corona of any star within range. We can induce flares, direct energy bursts, even trigger localized coronal mass ejections. We can burn anything in orbit around that star without touching the planet itself. The room went silent. "You are describing a weapon that could destroy entire civilizations," Prime Minister Okonkwo said slowly. "I am describing a weapon that could end the Velith Dominion in a single day if we chose to use it that way." Myre replied, "But we are not going to do that. We are going to use it to show them that humanity is not to be dismissed." Admiral Torres leaned forward. "How many of these devices do we have?" 23 are currently deployed near stars, belonging to species that voted against our membership. Seijun answered. Another 7 are positioned along Velith trade routes. None of the elder races have detected them because they do not believe such technology is possible. President Chen closed her eyes for a long moment. "If we use this weapon, we become exactly what they accused us of being. Dangerous primitives who solve problems with violence. If we do not use it, they will kill our people and laugh while they do it," Seijun countered. "They are already calling us cowards. They are already saying that humans are fit only for slavery. How many more of us have to die before we prove them wrong?" The debate lasted for hours. But in the end, the decision was unanimous. Earth would issue a single public demand. Release the hostages within 72 hours. No threats would be made, no warnings would be given. The Velith would simply be told what humanity expected, and then humanity would wait. The demand was broadcast on every frequency the humans could reach. It spread across the galaxy in hours, carried by traders and diplomats and curious observers who wondered what the restricted species thought they were doing. The Velith response came within minutes. High Arbiter Keseth himself appeared on screen, his purple scales gleaming under harsh lights. "The humans demand the release of trespassers," he said with obvious amusement. "They forget their place. Perhaps they need another lesson." The broadcast that followed showed 3 more executions. 3 more researchers who had done nothing wrong except be born. Seijun watched with tears streaming down his face as people he had known, people who had eaten dinner at his home and played with his children, were murdered for the entertainment of an alien audience. 72 hours. President Chun said when the broadcast ended. "And then what?" "And then we show them what happens when you push humanity too far." Seijun replied. "The hours past Earth went dark. Every transmission stopped. Every satellite went silent. The Velith assumed it was surrender. They assumed the humans had realized the futility of their position and were preparing to beg for mercy. They were wrong in an observatory on the dark side of the moon. Dr. Myra Cho entered the final activation sequence for the Ember Array. Target confirmed. Her assistant reported. The star Velith Prime orbits is within range. Myra thought about the people who had died. She thought about Ambassador Park's promise. In the high chamber, she thought about every human who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of friendship with whatever waited there. Initiate pulse sequence, she said. The star nearest to the Velith homeworld began to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, and the galaxy finally understood that humanity was no longer asking for permission to exist. The great station hung in the void between three dying stars, its metal skin reflecting ancient light that had traveled for millions of years to reach this place. Ambassador Una Park stood at the viewing port of the human shuttle and watched the conclave of ascending species grow larger. With each passing moment, she had prepared for this. Lay her entire life behind her. The rest of the diplomatic team sat in nervous silence. They were the first humans to ever reach this far into the galaxy, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on all of them. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, and the airlock hissed open to reveal a corridor of polished black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect. Una stepped forward first, her boots clicking against the floor as she led her team toward the high chamber. Alien figures watched from doorways and balconies above. Some had scales that shimmered like oil on water. Others moved on too many legs or floated without any legs at all. None of them spoke to the humans. They simply watched, with eyes that held curiosity and something that looked very much like pity. The high chamber opened before them like the mouth of some vast creature. 12 thrones sat in a semicircle at the far end, each one designed for a different body shape. The elder races of the galactic sovereignty occupied those thrones, their ancient eyes turning toward the small group of humans who walked across the empty floor. Una stopped at the designated speaking circle and bowed her head in the gesture of respect she had studied for months. Honored elders of the sovereignty, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I am Ambassador Una Park of Earth, and I come before you to petition for membership in your great union. Silence answered her. Then a figure on the central throne leaned forward, and Una felt her stomach tighten. High Arbiter Kesseth of the Velith Dominion was everything the intelligence reports had described. His scales were deep purple, almost black, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of a species that had ruled the stars for longer than humans had existed. You are the creatures from the death world, Kesseth said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber without any visible amplification. The ones who discovered our signals and built faster than light engines in 40 of your years. Yes. High Arbiter, Una replied. We detected the beacon near our outer planet and recognized it as artificial communication. 40 years, another elder repeated from a throne shaped like a pool of silver liquid. My species took 3,000 years to achieve the same. Perhaps they made errors in their calculations, Kesseth suggested with a sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps their engines will fail and strand them between stars where they belong. Una felt her team stiffen behind her, but she kept her expression calm. Our engines function within acceptable parameters. High Arbiter, we have tested them extensively. Kesseth waved one clawed hand dismissively. Tell us why you believe your species deserves membership in the sovereignty. We offer partnership, Una said, and she meant every word. Humanity has spent its entire history learning to work together despite our differences. We have overcome divisions of language, culture, and belief. We have faced extinction-level events and survived through cooperation. We believe these skills would benefit the sovereignty greatly. You speak of cooperation, Kesseth interrupted. But your world's history shows only war and destruction. You killed your own kind by the finishers. Millions. You burned your forests and poisoned your waters. You nearly destroyed yourselves. Before you even reached your own moon, we made mistakes. Yuna admitted, we have never denied that, but we learned from those mistakes. Every failure taught us something valuable. Every tragedy made us more determined to do better. Keseth turned to the other elders, his expression one of theatrical disbelief. They wish us to believe that failure is a qualification for membership. Several of the elders made sounds that could only be laughter. High Arbiter, Yuna pressed on. We are not asking for charity. We offer trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation. We've already made advances in several fields that might benefit sovereignty members. What could your species possibly offer us that we do not already possess? Keseth demanded. You live for barely 100 years. You cannot even survive in the mildest of environments without your protective suits and artificial atmospheres. Your bodies are fragile, your minds are limited, and your technology is primitive. You are thermal parasites clinging to a rock that will eventually be swallowed by your own sun. The words hung in the air like venom. Yuna felt the anger rising in her chest. But she forced it down. She had known this might happen. She had prepared for this. We may live short lives, she said quietly, but we accomplish much in our brief time. We dream big and act quickly. We adapt to challenges that would paralyze longer-lived species in endless debate. Our mortality drives us to create, to build, to reach beyond ourselves. Keseth made a dismissive gesture. Pretty words from a species that cannot even agree on a single government for its own planet. He turned to address the other elders directly. I move that the human petition be denied. Furthermore, I propose restricted status for their species. They shall be forbidden from expanding beyond their solar system, trading independently with sovereignty members, or developing military vessels. High Arbiter, please, Yuna said, and she hated the desperation that crept into her voice. Give us a chance to prove ourselves. The sovereignty does not grant chances, Keseth replied coldly. It grants membership to species that have earned it through millennia of advancement and stability. You have done neither. You are children playing with fire, and we will not allow you to burn down what we have built. The vote was quick. 10 of the 12 elders voted in favor of Keseth's proposal. Only 2 abstained. Their faces unreadable. None voted against. The petition is denied, Keseth announced with obvious satisfaction. The human delegation will return to their vessel and depart immediately. They will comply with the terms of restricted status effective upon their arrival in their home system. Failure to comply will result in consequences. Yuna stood frozen. For a long moment she had dreamed of this day since she was a child watching the stars from her grandmother's garden in Busan. She had believed that first contact would be the beginning of something wonderful. Instead, it was a door slammed in humanity's face. She turned to leave, her team following in stunned silence. Then she stopped and looked back at the 12 thrones. You have made your choice, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber. Remember that we offered friendship first. Remember that we came here with open hands and hopeful hearts. And remember this moment when you ask yourselves how it all began. Keseth laughed. Is that a threat? Little ambassador, no. Yuna replied, it is a promise. We will remember how we were treated here, and we will never forget what you have taught us about the galaxy. She walked out of the high chamber with her head held high, but inside she felt something cold and hard taking root. Humanity had reached out to the stars seeking partners and found only contempt. The shuttle departed an hour later as Yuna watched the conclave shrink in the rear display. One of her aides spoke up. What do we do now? Ambassador, we go home, Yuna said quietly. We tell them what happened here. And then we make sure that no one ever dismisses humanity again. 3 months later, a Velith mining consortium began illegal extraction operations in the Kuiper Belt. They were confident that the restricted species would do nothing. They were wrong.